So, we're barely a week into 2026 and the music industry is already having a massive breakdown. While everyone was distracted by New Year's, a bombshell lawsuit just hit the courts on January 2nd involving Will Smith, and it's pulling back the curtain on some pretty dark behavior behind the scenes of his 2025 tour. We're talking allegations of predatory grooming and priming that sound more like a thriller movie than a concert tour. And get this, the lawsuit claims the industry isn't just about the music anymore. It's about a system of control that treats even the biggest stars like they're owned. It's making everyone realize that the warnings we've heard for decades from legends like Prince and Taylor Swift weren't just celebrity drama, they were survival stories. Today, we're diving into the artists who actually risked their entire careers to expose the master trap and how the industry is finally facing a 2026 reckoning. To really understand why the labels are panicking right now, you have to look at what people are calling the Raye effect. If you don't know her story, Raye was basically held hostage by a major label for 7 years. They refused to let her put out her debut album, telling her she wasn't viral enough. They actually expected her to just keep writing hits for other people while her own career sat on a shelf. She eventually reached a breaking point, cried on her socials, and begged for her freedom. Fast forward to 2025 and 2026, and she's now the blueprint for every artist in the game. She went independent, swept the awards, and proved that the gatekeepers don't actually hold the keys anymore. Because of her, we're seeing a massive wave of artists walking away from their contracts this year. A report just dropped this week showing that 90% of young artists now prefer to stay independent rather than sign a predatory label deal. The labels used to be able to silence you if you complained, but in 2026, the fans have the receipts and they're siding with the creators. You can't really talk about the fight for independence without mentioning the man who basically started the entire movement, Prince. Back in the early 90s, he did something that absolutely shocked the world. He started showing up to red carpets and televised events with the word slave written across his face. At the time, the media thought he was just being eccentric or difficult, but the truth, he was making a literal legal point. Prince had just signed what looked like a massive $100 million deal, but he quickly realized it was a gilded cage. Because his label owned his name and his master recordings, he didn't even have the legal right to call himself Prince anymore without their permission. He was so fed up with the system that he changed his name to an unpronounceable symbol just to find a loophole in his contract. Here's the part that really highlights how deep the control went. Prince was so prolific that he wanted to release albums whenever he felt the spark, but the label literally blocked him, claiming it would oversaturate the market. They wanted to treat his art like a product on a shelf, and he wasn't having it. He famously told everyone that if you don't own your masters own you. So he spent the rest of his life warning young artists not to sign those standard deals, because once the ink is dry, you're essentially an indentured servant to a corporation. Looking at the music industry we're seeing today, it's clear Prince wasn't being dramatic, he was just 30 years ahead of the curve. If Prince provided the warning, Taylor Swift provided the blueprint for how to actually win. Most people know the story of her losing her masters to Scooter Braun, but here's the wild part that most people forget. She didn't just sit back and take it. When the industry told her that owning her early work was impossible, she decided to just redo the whole thing. By re-recording her albums as Taylor's version, she essentially turned her old masters into worthless files. It was a $360 million power move that most executives thought would fail miserably. But if that wasn't enough, she used her platform to educate her fans on why she was doing it, turning her Swifties into a literal army of copyright experts. Fast forward to mid-2025, and Taylor officially reclaimed 100% of her work. Because of her master ownership is now the number one thing new artists look for in a contract. She proved that if you have a loyal enough audience, you can actually bankrupt the people who tried to buy your legacy. Here we have a classic artist who rose to the point he allegedly ended up taking on the role of the gatekeeper instead, if the accusations turn out to be true. If you think these predatory tactics were left in the 90s, Check out the bombshell that just hit the courts on January 2nd, 2026. A world-class violinist named Brian King Joseph, who you might remember as a finalist on America's Got Talent, filed a massive lawsuit against Will Smith and his company, Treyball Studios. He was hired to be a lead performer on Will's 2025 based on a true story global tour, but the details coming out now are straight out of a psychological thriller. Joseph alleges that from the moment they met in late 2024, Will was deliberately grooming and priming him for sexual exploitation. He claims Will would pull him aside for private connection sessions, telling him things like, "You and I have a special connection I don't have with anyone else." But here's the really disturbing part. During a tour stop in Las Vegas, Joseph returned to his hotel room to find the door unlocked and a collection of bizarre items left on his bed. We're talking about a bottle of HIV medication with someone else's name on it, hospital discharge paperwork, a beer bottle, and a handwritten note with a heart drawn on it that said, "Brian, I'll be back no later than 5:30, just us, signed, Stone F." Joseph was terrified, believing a stranger was coming back to have unacceptable bedroom fun with him. But when he reported it to management, he says they didn't try to protect him. Instead, he claims they shamed him, accused him of fabricating the story, and fired him just 5 days later. The lawsuit points out that the management team were the only people with keys to his room, which raises the question, was this a coordinated test of submission? Now, I'll be the first to say that this is a mighty accusation to throw at someone when all you have is your word. Will's legal team is calling the whole thing baseless and reckless, but in 2026, the public isn't just taking denials at face value anymore. This case is being looked at as a prime example of how the industry tries to break artists before they're even allowed on the big stage. Then you have Kanye West, who decided to go scorched earth on the entire label structure a few years back. He famously posted over 100 pages of his private contracts on Twitter for the whole world to see, and the details were actually mind-blowing. He didn't just call the music industry a modern-day slave ship, he showed everyone the receipts. Here's the thing that most fans missed. Kanye's contract showed that because of how labels structure their advances, artists are essentially paying the company back for the privilege of being famous. He called it digital sharecropping, where the artist does all the work, but the label owns the land and takes most of the crop. By 2025 and early 2026, he started moving his entire world into his own Yeezy Sound ecosystem. He's been telling anyone who will listen that as long as you're using someone else's platform, you're just a tenant. His goal is to prove that you can have a massive hit without ever letting a corporate executive touch your masters, and honestly, the labels are terrified that he might actually be right. If that wasn't enough to make you look twice at your favorite albums, look at the mess SZA had to deal with to get her project Control out. It's a fan favorite now, but the way it was released was incredibly shady. SZA has hinted in interviews that she was such a perfectionist that her label eventually just ran out of patience. Check this out. The story goes that the label actually took her hard drive and chose the track list themselves, releasing the album without her final approval. Imagine being one of the best songwriters in the world and having your boss literally steal your work and publish it before you think it's finished. She called it a form of creative kidnapping. It worked out for her career, but it's a perfect example of the total lack of agency artists have once they sign those standard deals. It's why in 2026 we're seeing a huge spike in artists demanding final cut clauses, making sure no executive can ever just grab the hard drive again. So, what does all of this mean for the future of the music we love? When you look at the 2026 Will Smith lawsuit alongside the stories of Prince, Taylor, and Kanye, a really clear pattern starts to emerge. The industry has always relied on the fact that young artists are so hungry for fame that they'll sign away their lives before they even understand the fine print. They use these advances and special connections to create a system where the artist is always in debt and always under control. But the master trap is finally starting to fail. Between the January 2nd filings and the rise of independent powerhouses like Raye, the gatekeepers are losing their grip. We're entering an era where the fans are becoming the new labels, and the artists are realizing that their masters only have power if the artists stay silent. The year of truth wasn't just a catchy phrase back in 2024. In 2026, it's becoming an even bigger legal reality. At the end of the day, the music industry is facing a choice: adapt or vanish. We're watching the biggest stars in the world walk away from million-dollar deals just to have the freedom to own their own names. It's a heavy price to pay, but as Prince warned us decades ago, there's no amount of money worth being a slave to a system that doesn't respect your soul. I'm curious to hear what you guys think about the Will Smith lawsuit and this new wave of independence. Is the major label officially a thing of the past, or are they just gonna find a new way to hide the trap? Let me know your theories in the comments. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.